Hello, Matt Davis here with more quiz help. This one is from the review quiz for Chapter 8. In April of 2020, a Gallup poll reported that 1,394 of 2,448 U.S. adults interviewed said that they were concerned about getting the coronavirus or COVID-19. A 95% confidence interval for the true proportion of U.S. adults that were concerned about getting the coronavirus at that time was found to be P was an element of 0.5498 to 0.5890. Suppose that in April 2020 there were 260 million adults living in the U.S. Use the interval to determine a 95% confidence interval for the true number of those 260 million adults living in the U.S. that were concerned about getting the coronavirus. Enter the left boundary below. We'll do the left and right and show the interval, and then I'll talk about how you would enter the answer into active learning. But first, in the interest of giving help rather than answers, instead of assuming 260 million adults at that time, we're going to go ahead and work with 280 million adults. Absolutely the same idea, but slightly different answer. So you'll just have to make a little bit of an adjustment on this. So we start out with that confidence interval. That's for the population proportion. P is an element of 0.5498 to 0.5890. And they want us to give an interval, which sounds a little weird because it's like, well, hey, we already have an interval, right? They want us to determine a 95% confidence interval, it says. And that's what we have already. So what's different? The confidence interval that they want us to do is for the true number. And the emphasis really there is on the number part. We don't have the number right now, we have the proportion. This interval right here, this is for proportion. So what we need to do is not calculate a new interval from scratch, but just take this one for the proportion and convert that to one for a number. So how do you do that? Well, the 0.5498 on the left represents 54.98% of the adults were concerned about coronavirus as a lower boundary. But when we say 54.98% of the adults, we're talking about 54.9% of the 280 million adults. So when we want to switch our interval to now be about the number instead of the proportion or the percentage, then what we need to do is take that 0.5498 and multiply that by 280 million. Because that's going to switch it from a proportion to a count. And then we do the same thing to get our right boundary. A little confusing, all these commas here, so I'll do a red comma to separate our two numbers. But the other side would be the 0.5890 times 280 million. So to get the new interval, it's just two multiplications. The 280 million times the 0.5498 and then times the 0.5890. So those are pretty straightforward multiplications, so I'm just going to go ahead and do them for you. And what we would end up with on the left is 153,944,000. And then again, I'll just do the red comma to make it a little bit more clear where one number starts and the next one ends. And our upper boundary would be 164,920,000. And again, those just come from multiplication. So if you take 0.5498 times 280 million, that gives you this 153 million. If you take the 0.5890, the upper boundary for the proportion interval, that gives you the 164 million. So there's our interval right there. This is what they asked us to find, was a new confidence interval, and there it is. And now it's about counts instead of about proportions. Just a note about entering the answer into active learning. This specific one says just enter the left. Half of the questions say left, half of them say right. So you might have had either version. Let's just look at the left one and say, well, what would we put in active learning? Well, active learning is going to insist on a number, and it's going to get confused if you put a comma in. It doesn't see that as a number. So you have to make sure you would enter your left boundary like this. And so similarly, if they were asking you for the right boundary, you'd put the one I have shaded in green, and you would have to leave out the commas. So a couple versions or a couple things to worry about. I guess really just the process, right? We're going to multiply that proportion times the 280 million. That's the main thing. And then the place where it can go wrong that's kind of silly, but you got to be careful with it, is you can't put those commas in. Otherwise, it's going to confuse active learning and they'll mark you wrong. So hopefully that clears this up for you. It is just a quick multiplication now that you know what to do. So it should be a nice, easy one to fix. So good luck to you as you head back to the quiz.